Session. Great. The recording is started. You should see a red button on the top, and I will start with Milestone One. My mic on mute. Let me see. Is that better now? I put my audio on mute. Can you still hear me? Oh, yes, I think I did. I muted the speakers. Let me see. Oh, there it is. Okay. Is that what you meant, Christina? Did I mute them? I think I got it. Everybody sees this welcome page. Yes, I'm going to now take this welcome page off, and I will share the guidelines for the milestone for microeconomics. Which is, okay, Echo 201. That should be coming up right now. There it is. So this is the rubric that you can find in your course for Echo 201 final project. We're going to go through this rubric and not use the specific rubric for the milestone, since you can see as I scroll down that the final has an extra grading category, exemplary. So although you only need to be proficient to earn 100% on the milestone, I always advise to use the exemplary and just be aware of what additional requirements there are when you complete your final so that you can get 100% on your final. The final project for microeconomics requires you to select a firm, which you should have selected during the first week of class. You should have emailed your instructor and confirmed the firm with him or her. So I hope you have. If you haven't, you're still in time, obviously, to select a firm because that's what you're going to work on for the final project. There is a document that provides you a list of suggested firms. The suggested firms the list is compiled based on some requisites that you need to have for the firm you're going to research. One requisite is that the firm is a US-based firm. Another one is that it's publicly it's a public company, so you will be able to access financial information online. So it has to be a listed company. This will give you access to the past 5 years of financial reports. So this is the other important thing. If it's a company that just became publicly shared, maybe this year or last year, it won't work because you still won't have access to all the financial reports that you will need in Milestone 2 and Milestone 3 to show the trends the company has had. Hi, Beth. We've just started, so you haven't missed a lot. So the first, so that's what you're going to be doing for the final project is research the firm. You're going to apply the microeconomic concepts that you are learning as you go through the course, and you're going to apply them in each milestone. Milestone 1 requires you to create an introduction to your paper. So when you introduce your paper, you're introducing the purpose of your paper. What are you researching, and what conclusions are you trying to reach? What's the purpose and what's the scope of your paper? So you will use some microeconomic terminology to explain what the purpose of the paper is, and it'll be maybe like a 2-paragraph introduction. If you use the correct terminology and the industry terminology, you will already be exemplary for the final, and you won't even have to go back and touch up your purpose in your introduction. And that is something that you can already start doing in your initial research. The second part of Milestone 1 is pretty straightforward, is to provide a history of the firm, an overview of the firm. So what does the firm do? Maybe you can find out, how was the firm born? Who founded it? Why? What goods and services does it provide and does it sell? And some students, in the history, you usually find the history of the firm in the About section of the firm's website. And often they also explain some of the challenges the firm is facing, or has faced and has overcome. Those are very useful to put in the history and in the introduction to your paper, because those are good guidelines that you can follow through when you do Milestone 2 and Milestone 3 to address the issues with demand and supply, or when you examine other aspects, the market for the firm. So when you examine other aspects of the firm's activity, it is useful to know and find out what challenges the firm might have faced in the past, or might have resolved already. This is also important because at the end of the paper, you will be asked to provide some recommendations. And you don't want to provide recommendations or advice for the future for something that has already been accomplished. For example, one of my students was researching Tesla one time, and he suggested that Tesla should expand the market by providing a different type of vehicle. But at the same time he was making this recommendation, Tesla had actually come out with the proposal of providing a new pickup truck. So that was something that they had maybe just started suggesting or advertising a month before he wrote the paper. And so it's good to research and be actual, be informed of what your firm is doing, what it has done, so that your recommendations are going to be up to date and not redundant. They're not going to be a repetition of what has already happened in the history of your firm. If we go to the rubric, you will see that in the proficient, it says to outline the purpose of the paper and how it will inform the conclusion. You need to explain how it will inform the conclusion. What is your scope? You're actually pretending to be a consultant for the firm, and you're going to research, the strengths and the weaknesses of your firm and how it can improve its market position and what recommendation you will be able to provide at the end. So that is really how you're going to end your paper. And so this has to be explained in the introduction of your paper. If you want to try and be exemplary right from the get-go, then you can also use industry-specific language to establish your expertise in the field, since you are the consultant. So industry-specific language can be either some microeconomic terminology, which you've already acquired from the first chapters of the textbook, but also terminology that you've acquired by researching your firm. So the Milestone One is pretty straightforward, and I think it's really important at this time that you establish that you are comfortable with the firm you have chosen. If you have not chosen a firm that is on the suggested list, then I would say it is really important that you do get approval from your instructor for that firm. The reason I say this is because there have been students who have chosen maybe the firms they work for. And it looks like that firm will work fine because you work in it, you're an insider, and you might have access to some information, but you really need to make sure that you do have access to the information you do need to complete the paper. So it's always good to brainstorm with your instructor. Make sure you're on the same line. If the instructor has concerns that you might not be able to find the correct enough information for that firm, that is something you might want to think of and consider. The second part of your milestone for this week is the history and the overview. So you want to summarize comprehensively the history of the firm. If you notice, the difference between the needs improvement and the proficient is that comprehensively. So if you just write one brief paragraph about the history of the firm, and that is all you write about that firm, you're probably going to get a needs improvement. You want to write a good detail of information, a couple of paragraphs in which you provide an explanation of what the firm does, and again, we said what goods and services it sells. And if you want to be exemplary, you have to choose a company that is well suited for the analysis. So when you explain the history, it needs to be clear that you will be able to provide a comprehensive analysis of the company as you progress through the through your milestones. So you might be able to be exemplary for the history part only at the end when you do your final, because then you will have all the information you need because you've done the research through the 3 milestones, and you might be able to enrich the history and overview of the company when you have completed all the research through the 7 weeks of the class. I would like to share, this is all you have to do for Milestone 1. It's pretty straightforward, and it's mostly, as I said, just researching the about section of your company and, finding a little bit out the history, but you don't have to do any specific microeconomic research at this time. And as I said, use this as an opportunity while you're researching. Are you comfortable with this company that you've chosen? If you think you're struggling with this company while you're trying to produce Milestone 1, this would be the right time to contact your instructor if you decide that you need to change company, because then you'll get behind if you make this decision later. So this is a good opportunity to find everything you can out in general about the company, see if you're comfortable with it, see if you can find all the resources that you think you need. I'm going to share an example of what the paper, the introduction, and the history might look like so that you have an idea about the lengths. I would say it's probably going to be 1.5 to 2 pages. Do you have any questions about the rubric before I switch over to the paper? Thank you, Mark. I don't see anybody else writing, so I'm going to switch over and share the paper. The Echo 201. I'm still getting acquainted with the names that have been given to the documents on here. Because there it is. So this is what the paper will look like. There is the third category, the articulation of response, and you can get a proficient and eventually an exemplary on that by meeting all the formatting requirements. So you will need the title page, which is with the running head, if you can see it. So you're going to write the title, author, and the affiliation. So you would write that you're doing Echo 201 for Southern New Hampshire. Then your first paper, this is the introduction where it says title of paper. Some students write introduction, some don't. It's up to you. That is your decision. But you begin the paper with the introduction. The recommendation is to use the active voice, not the passive voice. So you're using yourself, you're the consultant for the firm. And so your active voice would be I can, being yourself as first person. You have to follow APA guidelines for the paper. And so there are some guidelines, Times New Roman and 12-point, double-spaced, and the guidelines that are indicated in this part of the paper. And then you can proceed to start writing it. I can email you a copy. This copy is also available in your classroom. If you go under the learning modules and the resources, this is there already. But I can send you, I can't email you, but I can send you the link to it if you want to. But it's all in your classroom. This is where you find the rubrics for the milestones. It says sample paper, and this is it. This is what it is. This is the sample. You will find the same paper. It's called the Final Paper Guide. That's what the name of the file is. So, well, let me try and get you a link. I don't know if Christina, does it work if I link it to just a class from Brightspace, or does it have to be specifically? I'm not too sure how that would work. Yeah. But this, I mean, the paper is on here. It's also here on the recording. So you could pause the recording and just read what you're reading right now. But you do have links in your modules. You can locate it in your course. And this explains what the purpose of your paper is. I heard Nicole in the previous webinar she did that said that the new copy that you have in your courses has also a link in it that helps you develop the paper. So I don't know if this link, the link works if it's probably from the class you're at, but everybody has it in their classes. So if you go into your course, you go click on your learning modules, and then you go on your assignment rubrics and guidelines, you will be able to find the final paper guide. And it's here. So see how long the introduction is? It's about 2 paragraphs. And where you describe the purpose of your paper. So what is your intent? Why are you writing this paper? What information do you want to convey? So you would write something like, I'm conducting a research of the Coca-Cola company, that you want to explore its strengths and weaknesses and find out, maybe, if you found out about a weakness already, or you have ideas about the company, you can start, expressing an idea of what you want to achieve. You can do it in this section. You haven't, well, I know you haven't done a full research on the company, but it's blank. It shouldn't be blank. The research, you don't need to know everything from the company from an economics perspective. You need to know more the history of the company and what the company is about. So, for example, if you go you might find out while you're reading about the company that who the main competitors are, or what challenges it had in the past. So you can just describe here. You can provide an analysis saying you're going to do some research on the supply and demand, the price elasticity of the company, and the market placement of the company, and you will try to provide recommendations on how the company can improve its market positioning, for example. So that could be an introduction with a conclusion. I stated it in few words. You can expand it a bit because you know what company you're researching. But you don't need to go into a lot of detail. Like, you don't need to talk about the supply and the demand. You don't need to talk about the price elasticity of the company. You just need to mention what kind of research you're going to conduct. Does that help, Karen? Yeah, so in other words, what the purpose of the paper? What are you going to do? Wanda, what does the title affiliation mean? The title, the affiliation, the author, is just Southern New Hampshire. Basically, in the title paper, you're going to write author affiliation. So you're going to write the title of your paper, for example, Coca-Cola, author, Wanda Pace, and then you're going to write Southern New Hampshire University, microeconomics. So you can do that. For example, there is a sample paper which I believe researches Hershey or some, I don't know, I'm not sure which. But if you open the sample paper, you get a good idea also of how to format the paper. The sample paper occasion is the same where the rubrics and the guidelines are. There's a whole list. There's all the rubrics for the milestones. There's the sample paper, and there's the list of suggested firms. That it's in the form of a PowerPoint. So it's just got like the logos of the firms, and then if you scroll down, there's all the financial reports for 2015, I believe, which are just an example of what you're looking for. You want to go back 5 years, and now we're in 2018, so you can actually go up to 2017 probably at this time of the year with the financial reports. So the references for this milestone specifically, you probably just need 1 or 2 references because you're just really researching the history. So if you just have the reference of about what the history is about that you can usually find in the About section of the company. That might be enough for you. The sample paper is blank. Oh, Christina will be on it. She is our dean that takes care of all this, and she can have. So a sample of the paper was not included. Oh, well, the sample of the paper. I'm not teaching a microeconomics class this semester, so I looked on the previous one I taught, and the sample paper was there. But I'm not sure. Can we share files on here that they could download somehow? So Mark, you already have 7 references. That's fine. I mean, you can never have too many references. If the references are relevant to the content and if they're useful to you, you can use them. Remember that the content you're writing has to reflect the references that you're listing. So if you have 7 references, you will have at least 7 different citations, because you're going to be citing those references either at the end of the sentence or the end of the paragraph. Yeah, there's only one slide with the logos of the companies. And then there's like if you scroll down, there's access. You should have access to the financial reports of some of the companies, which is an example of what you're looking for. If you lose points if you go over 2 pages? You shouldn't. No, there shouldn't be a limit. I have never deducted points for the assignment if the assignment went over, as long as the content is relevant. You might write 3 pages but not explain anything, and you can write 1.5 pages and explain everything. So really, the most important thing is the content. When I say the length's about 1.5 to 2 pages, it's because usually in 1 page you wouldn't be able to write comprehensively the history of a company, because you're talking of a company that has at least been in business 5 to 7 years, because then you can find all the reports you need. The reports, besides, you can find the 2015 reports. You can find under it, always in the same section of rubrics and guidelines. Also, you can find the reports on the company's website, because if the company is publicly traded, they need to publish their financial reports every year. So you can, I didn't quote something. I've used references for deep backgrounded. If the reference you're listing, Christine, contains the information you're using, then that reference is fine. Even if you just went and read a little bit more about something else just to be better informed, if you're not listing it in your references, then you wouldn't be citing it. The citations are only the sources that you're listing in your references. Also, Wikipedia, if you decide to use it as a starting point, just because you can get some good general information about a company, you can use it as a starting point, but do not references. Use it as a starting point to gather information, but then find a website that contains a more reliable or accountable website that contains that information that you can reference. No wiki. Wikipedia mostly has correct content, but it's not considered a suitable academic source. It's an open source. Anybody can go in, change the content on it. It takes a bit of time for the editors of Wikipedia to go over it and make sure everything is always correct. You can't rely on it 100% of times. So you should use scholarly sources. Exactly. We've got another few minutes till 9 o'clock, until we have to get ready to share, to start our microeconomics. Do you have any more questions about Milestone One and the history that you have to provide for your company? It says here, be sure to personalize the heading to reflect your company. So like it says history of the company, you would write history of Green Mountain Coffee, for example. And in this section, you just summarize the history of your firm. As I said, in my experience, the best place has always been the About section of the firm. If it's a very famous firm, you can find history even through newspaper articles sometimes, or someone who's covered the firm for other reasons. Yes, you're just doing the introduction and the history for Milestone One. As you can see, even the sample here, the title paper goes about a 1.5. I mean, this history on this sample paper is short. There is no way you would be able to comprehensively explain the history of a company in one paragraph. There's just not, even if you are very good at summarizing. Yeah, Green Mountain Coffee is popular. I think it's out of Vermont too, so a lot of students from New England choose it. A copy of the sample paper. Christina, is there a way? I mean, is there a reason why it was taken out of the class? I'm not sure if it's something that has been decided not to share anymore, the sample paper, or let's see if Christina knows why it's not shared anymore. No, that's the sample. I'm talking of the sample paper, like the Hershey one, the paper that provides a sample of what another student wrote. There's two papers. There's one that's a sample of the APA formatting, and then there's one that is actually a sample of a research from another student. But yeah, the link is the Hershey paper. Right, thank you, Mike. That should be in the class. It was in the class I taught 2 semesters ago, but I'm not sure. It should be under the rubrics and guidelines. I don't think that link is working because Mike might be getting it from his own. Let me see if it works for me. I'm going to try and see. Yeah, it doesn't work for me either when I go on it. I'm not sure if there's a way. The sample paper is located on the learning modules with the final project supplemental resources. Thank you, Patricia. If you go on the supplemental resources of the final project, everything that Southern New Hampshire has decided to share with you is there. If the sample paper is not there anymore, then they might have been a decision not to share the Hershey paper anymore. Oh, you can't download it. Okay. Well, no, if you go in the learning modules and you on the side you see module 1, module 2, module 3, there's at the end it says final paper supplemental resources, and you should be able to go in there and gather all the information you need. Now the IT desk, that's something that can be addressed. Yes, you can ask your professor to share it in the announcement if you are not able to access it. So I will give you my email. If you send me an email because you are not able to find this final paper guide or any of the other resources available for ECHO 201, send me an email after, and I will share with you this file that I have open here so that you can get an idea of this. And then Christina is gonna also make sure that the sample paper in the classes is updated, so it's not a blank paper anymore. So if you save my email address, I can also help you that way. But I'm not sure why you're having trouble downloading it. Oh, try hitting the open with DocRead if it's a blank page. So some of the others actually have a bit of help. Interesting that you would have to do. Well, I have a copy of this paper that you're looking at on my computer. email me. Tell me that you were at the live webinar, and if you could please, I can please email it to you, and I will be happy to do so. It just takes me a minute. So I'm going to shut down ECO 201 and start ECO 202, macroeconomics, the milestone for that. Thank you for coming for microeconomics. I hope to see you back for the live webinar of Milestone 2. And the recording of this webinar will be available through the YouTube SNHU channel, Echo channel, tomorrow. If you want to watch it again, you want to read the links that were provided, you can look at those. You can look at this paper, or you can just, listen to it again. So have a good evening, microeconomics. I'm going to start macro. And for macro, we are going to do there, this one. Okay, so you do need to choose the doc reader option to open the sample paper, the guideline paper for the final of microeconomics. We're switching over to macroeconomics. Welcome, macroeconomics students. You are going to work on Milestone 1 this week, and you're going to start researching the decade you chose during Module 1 for your Module 1 discussion. Hello. You're welcome. So you should have already chosen a decade last week, because for Module 1 discussion, you had to start introducing your decade, the reason you chose it, and so this is the time, like I said in microeconomics, Module 2, when you start Milestone 1, is the time that if you think you have decided a decade you are not fond of, this is the time to change, if any. If you start researching your decade and find all the macroeconomic data through Milestone 1, put all the work in, then you are advised to stick through it, just because it would be too difficult to go back and start your research again. Milestone, the final project for macroeconomics requires you to choose a decade between 1950 and the current decade. Some students go all the way up to 2015 or 2017, so up to today, and you will examine the macroeconomic data for your decade. When we're talking of macroeconomic data, we're talking of examining the GDP, so the growth of the economy, unemployment, inflation, and in the case of Milestone 1, interest rate, and how the interest rate affect the other economic factors of your decade. You can use 80s, 90s, yeah. I mean, you can choose any decade you want. Some students like overlapping the decades and doing like 1955, 1965. In my opinion, I find that to become confusing sometimes, just because some decades are very self-contained, like the 70s. But you can choose any decade you feel more comfortable researching. Some students choose their decade because they're really curious about it. Others choose it because that's the decade they're born in. Others choose the most current decade because they're curious to find out what happened during the recession, how it was dealt with. So every decade presents different challenges. If you, say, research the 1950s, you will find sometimes it's a little harder to pinpoint the monetary policies, but they are there. They do exist, so there's enough to write the PowerPoint on. And then if you go, other in the 1990s is the same. There's more focus on the fiscal policies, but the monetary policies are still there. So you can always find them. So any decade is good. They all have different challenges, either at some point or the other of the milestones. So there is no decade that is easier to research than others. Going down to the requirements of Milestone One, I'm going to use the rubric for the final. The reason I'm using the rubric for the final is because when you present the final, you will have an extra category, which is the exemplary category. You can actually develop the speaker notes enough while you're working on the milestone to have already an exemplary work, so that at the end of the class, you don't really have to go back and work too much on your final. You can just assemble it, focus on the slides that are missing, and be exemplary already. So read the feedback that your instructor provides you, because for example, will specify if the milestone is already exemplary for the purposes of the final or not. You should have feedback from your instructor that tells you if you have included enough information in the speaker notes to be proficient, or if you have exemplary, or if you have to work more when you get to the final. The first thing you will have to develop several slides for Milestone One, and you will have to learn how to find graphs that illustrate the data you are going to research. The best source for the graphs would be Fred. It's the St. Louis Federal Reserve website. There is links in your course to access it. And I can also, once we go through this, the rubric, I can quickly show you. I can share the screen for Fred, so you kind of get an idea of what it is. But for the milestone, you will have to research mostly data. So you will first of all have to research the GDP, the annual GDP during the time frame, and calculate specific growth rates. Now, you don't have to necessarily sit down and calculate the growth rate from every year. The way to bypass the calculation is to find the information for the growth rate. So when you look at the graphs, you don't just find the GDP, which is expressed in dollar numbers, but you will also find a graph for growth rates, which will be expressed in percentages, in percentage change. And this way you can see what percentage change there was year by year throughout the decade. When you analyze the growth, it will not be sufficient to say, for example, in the 1990s, that the economy grew from 1990 till 2000, it grew 30%. That is going to be a need improvement. You will not be proficient with such a vague analysis. Your growth rates need to be analyzed throughout the decade, if not year by year, every couple of years, if there's not big changes, just to show in which years of the decade there have been growth or dips, and you will explain what was happening during those years that would have caused those changes in the growth rates. So it could have been some event. It could have been some policies that were happening during that time. That's what you will explain in the speaker notes. So you just analyze the growth rates, and you explain the relevance of the growth rates observed. And then if you explain that relevance, you will be exemplary. When you are examining the growth rates, you will do one slide that will focus on the trends, and then you will do another slide that will focus on the historical or current events that impacted that decade. Now, a fiscal policy, so for example, the Recovery Act enacted during the recession, is not considered a historical event, because that fiscal policy was intended to affect the economy and change growth. You want to find historical or current events such as Hurricane Katrina, or in the 70s, the oil embargo, maybe new trade agreements that encouraged international trade with other countries. So you want to find events that affected historically the US, but that also had an impact on the economy. And does anybody have questions about the events? I find that this is a section that is often overlooked or misunderstood. So I would like the events to be very clear, like what influenced the national output during your decade. The same events you can use further down after you've examined unemployment and inflation to explain how these events affected unemployment and inflation. So you don't have to find new events. You can use the same events you use for the GDP. You can use them for unemployment and inflation. So you can, I accept even one slide that covers GDP, unemployment, and inflation that observes all three. You can do it in two separate slides. You can ask your instructor what they prefer. A place that is best. There is like the historical encyclopedia that usually goes decade by decade. That can be a good place to find the historical events. The other way to find them sometimes is going through on the White House president's website. That is a good place to find the fiscal policies for Milestone 2, but is also a good place to find out what historical events happened during your decade. So either the president's or the historical encyclopedia. Sometimes if you Google history of the 1990s, you get websites that tell you year by year what happened. And then you just have to sort of skim through it because it'll tell you every single detail of that decade, even the things you're not interested. But like the 1990s are important. There was the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, international landscape changed. That's a really important event. In the 1960s, you have the space race, which was a really important event. It was a government spending policy, but the space race was not intended for economic recovery. It was intended for, making the U.S. look great compared to Russia. So the space race. The Cold War is an historical event that affected the decades right after World War II all the way to the end of the 80s. So that is always the wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the war on terror that we've been through. The 1990s started with the Gulf War. These are all historical events that are relevant. Weather events, extreme weather events. The oil spill is an event. The Twin attack, the technology boom and the technology bust, those are all events that are relevant for the purpose of this section. Once you've described the events that affected GDP and growth, you will move on and you need to examine unemployment and inflation trends. So we'll find a graph. You can still use Fred for this, or you can go on the website of the Bureau and Labor website, and Bureau and Labor Statistics. You can find unemployment trends and inflation trends, and you can provide a graph. The graph is the best way because it just shows the trends. You can see the lines going up and down, and it shows those trends. And in the speaker notes, you will explain how the unemployment and the inflation trends relate to the GDP trends. So when GDP grows, unemployment decreases, and what is happening to inflation in your decade. Sometimes inflation goes up and sometimes it goes down. You will have to just compare and contrast your data information and explain it in the speaker notes. That's what's required for this. To be exemplary for the final in this section, they want to know how the data is collected and calculated. And when we're talking of collecting the data, we're talking of the survey that is done to collect all the data on unemployment and inflation. So once you have all the unemployment and inflation trends, you can move on and explain what events affected unemployment and inflation based on the trends you have observed. So maybe, there might have been a major historical event that didn't cause or didn't affect. And you can also say that it depends on what you observe in your data. And if your observation makes sense, from an economic viewpoint, then it's logical, then it's going to be good, even if it might appear strange to you. Like, for example, in the 70s, unemployment and inflation are both high, which was unheard of until the 70s. But that's how it was. It was stagflation in the 70s. The slide can have just the graph and then explain the information in the notes. Yes, that is correct. If you want to, you can use the slide entirely for the graph and then explain everything in the speaker notes. The slides are only used to provide visual information, visual aids, and maybe you can put key concepts. So for example, when you're doing the unemployment events in this section, you can you could use the slide, for example, to pinpoint the 3 historical events that you found for that decade and just write the names of the historical events and then explain in the speaker notes how they affected unemployment and inflation. So the slides don't have enough space to develop a lot of content. They're limited, which is why you need to use the speaker notes to develop your content in a paragraph format where, you know, like a discussion. The last slide you will do is examining the interest rates fluctuations. Now, to examine the fluctuations, again, the easiest way would be to have a graph. In all of these cases, you can have a table if you're more comfortable working with tables. But if you have a graph, it really shows you the fluctuations, how it goes up and down, you know, the dips and the highs. And in the speaker notes of the interest rate fluctuations, you have to explain how changes in interest rates will affect other factors of the economy. So what it wants to know is when interest rates go up, what happens to inflation? What happens to unemployment? What can happen to the GDP? What happens to investments? What happens to foreign trade? Those are the elements that are specifically included in the rubric. When interest rates go up, the exchange rate for the dollar can change, and that is why foreign trade is affected. So when the dollar has a higher value, it means that what we are exporting is worth more, and foreign countries are going to buy less of it because they can't afford it as much. The same thing for us, though. If our dollar is very strong, we will be able to import more because we can afford foreign products more, right? So interest rates impact the foreign trade. And depending on how interest rates are managed, we may import or export different amounts of goods, and we might have a deficit on our trade balance, or we might have less of a deficit. We usually always have a deficit on our trade balance, but it might decrease because of the changes in the interest rates. So that's what you want to explain in the interest rates fluctuations. And to be exemplary, if you want to start working on it, you only have to explain how other factors, in addition to those listed in the rubric, so any other macroeconomic factor that is relevant could be affected. You would just explain how interest rates overall affect the economy in addition to those factors. And that would be the end of Milestone One. So you need at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides. You can have more if you feel that you need more space to show your graphs, because you might want a slide to show unemployment graph and a slide to show the inflation graph. So you start having 6 slides, for example. And you absolutely need to explain both how unemployment fluctuated according to GDP and how inflation fluctuated according to the GDP. It's not just one or the other, it's both, if you want to be proficient. Yes, you will be able to access the recording of the webinar tomorrow. Your instructor should email you a link or should post it on the course. If not, you can go on YouTube. You can select the SNHU Echo channel, and you will be able to find a copy of this webinar posted there tomorrow morning. So either you can get it through your instructor or you can go straight to YouTube and find it. And there's also copies of the old webinars too. So if you want, you know, different perspective or additional information, you can go and find old copies and listen to them too. You listen always to the last 30 minutes because the first 30 minutes is microeconomics. Does anybody have any questions about Milestone One? Do you all know how to develop the speaker notes? You do cite your sources in the speaker notes, yes. So when you're developing your speaker notes, it would just be like you developed an essay. At the end of the sentence or the paragraph related to that source, you will include your citation. So just pretend your speaker notes are like a brief essay of that slide, you know, 1 or 2 paragraphs, and then you will have your citations there. And then the last slide you're going to use to include your references. Obviously, you're not going to have any speaker notes in the reference slide. You can include your references in the slide. And you will also always have to follow APA style formatting for references and citations. The speaker notes go under. There's a section that is not included in the slide that is underneath it. And there is a link that I can share that shows you, let me share it with you, where you can access, I can find it. And there it is. How to put the speaker notes into your PowerPoint. Let me share it with you. There it is. If you go on this YouTube video, it explains how to include, how to say, actually it shows how to save the speaker notes when you're converting to PDF. Sorry, that's how to save. That's how to convert to PDF, including the speaker notes. The other YouTube video is, let me find it for you. To where it teaches you how to include the speaker notes is, I like this video that this so I'm just creating this guy did. Here you can hear it in the background. This is the one I like using in my class. Yes, you can go, when you go, Janice, when you go on Fred and you find your graph, you are able to, you find your graph in billions of dollars, and then you can go on there and you can convert it in percentages, and then it will also let you export to PowerPoint. So when you export it to PowerPoint, you'll be able to paste it into a slide. You are also able to select the decade you need. So there's a slider. Let me see if I can share this. Let me see if I know how to do this. Let me see. There. I'm still learning the ropes on the Adobe. But see, if you go on Fred, so this is Fred. It's fred.sanluisfed.org. And I have already selected GDP, but you would go up here and you would search Fred, and you would write gross domestic product or GDP. Now, if you see here, this gross domestic product is in billions of dollars. And while I'm doing this, I'm not able to see the chat. Oh yeah. So when you go on Fred here, you can select the decade you want to research. So if you put, I don't know if you guys can see the mouse and how I'm doing it, but I don't know if you guys can see how I move the mouse. Let me see. But you can slide and say go to the 70s, okay? And make your graph start in, or you can write it up here. Do 1970, 1970, 1980. And that deleted it. Let me see. 1970. Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me do it, but usually you can go, there you go. So for example, I was able to highlight the 1980s. So you can see what the trend from 1980 to 1990 was. Then you can go and edit the graph, and you can billions of dollars, and you can find percentage change. So you would select percentage change, and look how different the graph looks when you look at percentage change. What looked like an evenly growing line of growth is actually ups and downs. You can see in 1982 there was negative growth. There was less growth, and like in 1989 there was a dip in 1986. So you can really examine the the graph, and you can select the frequency. So you can do it quarterly, semi-annual. You can do annual if you just want to see the annual growth. So it's a graph that is a little bit more clear. It focuses more on the annual. And then you can also, let me see if I can move this out of the way. And in here, you should be, see, you can edit line 1. So you can make some edits. And there is a way to, that's the formatting. And you can download. So if you go into download, it'll show you to PowerPoint. And you can just hit download PowerPoint and then include it in your PowerPoint. So you would open PowerPoint, and your PowerPoint opens. So you can do this for the gross domestic product. You can do it for unemployment, for inflation, and for interest rate. See, and now you already have your graph included in here. The source is in your speaker notes. So your speaker notes are already open, and this is not showing. It looks like it's not showing the PowerPoint because I'm sharing Firefox. Let me see how to do that. Let me see how I share an application. Share my screen. Okay, let me share the PowerPoint. So when I've hit download PowerPoint, it opened up my PowerPoint and it included the graph inside one of the slides. And if you can see down here, I can slide up and down the speaker notes. It gives you all the information about the graph that you've chosen. So you have all that information, so you can start writing into the speaker notes. Move this down, and you can start writing everything you have observed about the gross domestic product. You can put a year up here because indicate your decade, but like this would be the graph you would show for growth in the 1980s, for example. You know, I would do percentage change per year unless there is something very, like for example, for the recession, you can show that there was a recession because you had the 2 quarters of negative growth. So you might want to show the quarters just to show why it was determined to be a recession at that time. But percentage change per year is sufficient if you can, you know, I think the percentage change per year gives you a better idea of what the trends were for the decade as compared to every quarter, because it goes up and down every quarter. So it's a little bit more confusing. I think the yearly one is a little bit more clear and it's a little bit easier to examine when you are, you know, when you're trying to identify, for example, the events that affected the economy. Because the events are not going to affect immediately the economy. Usually they affect the economy within a couple quarters or 1 or 2. It's not going to like be the next day that an event affects the. So let me go back to sharing the document, and then okay. And is everybody clear? If you go in the PowerPoint for Echo 202, let me open it. Share document. You will be able also, let me see, final project. This should be it. No, bear with me because these are not my documents and they're named differently somehow. The final project document, where's the PowerPoint? If you go in the PowerPoint that's provided, there it is, for your document, see, this would be the PowerPoint. So you have a title page, and mine doesn't scroll down. Oh, here it is. If you see, like on the GDP slide, there's some links. It says real GDP data can be found here. If you click on those links, it will take you to the Fred website, and then you can do your research. You can use the numbers to calculate the growth rates. There's a link to the growth rates and how you calculate them. You can also use the resources available in my Econ Lab. If you go to my Econ Lab and you find resources module by module, there's some videos in there, and the videos are great. And there's also the PowerPoints. If you use the PowerPoints of the chapters, sometimes you might find some visual aid that will help you with the milestone, and you can include it. Just make sure you references that it's from Hubbard, and you might be able to include it. It might help you. You can find, for example, the models that you can use in Milestone 2 and Milestone 3, the aggregate demand and supply models, to show the impact of the fiscal and monetary policies on the economy. So use the resources in the My Econ Lab, because those are very valuable. The PowerPoints can be of great help to find visual aids or to give you a summary of what you read in the book, but pinpointing the essential parts of the chapter. So like, especially if you've been in a hurry reading the chapter because you didn't have a lot of time due to work and family circumstances, the PowerPoints can be great help to review the content of every week's reading. And you can find them in the My Econ Lab resources through your course. Does anybody have any questions regarding how to develop the PowerPoint and the speaker notes? I've posted the 2 links, one to show how to add the speaker notes and one to show how to save the speaker notes if you're converting your PowerPoint to a PDF. Both links, it's easier if you convert your PowerPoint to a PDF. You have a better, a more accurate originality report from Turnitin, so you know if you have paraphrased enough your content. Oh, you're welcome, Janice. Does anybody have any more questions? I will have the recording of this webinar available tomorrow. By the way, I didn't introduce myself during the ECHO 202. I am not Nicole Soto. I'm filling in for her this semester. So I will be conducting the next seminars. My name is Kiara Yates, and I am a micro and macro adjunct faculty for Southern New Hampshire. I'll be doing all the webinars this semester. Hi, Betty. I'm not teaching a class this semester. I'm actually only focusing on the webinars. So I'm glad it was helpful. If you have any questions, I'll be here for another few minutes, and otherwise we'll be wrapping it up, and I'll be wishing you all a good evening. And this webinar will be available tomorrow on the ECHO SNHU channel on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it again if you want to. You can watch the old webinars if you want to gain additional insight. Oh, I'm glad that was helpful, Susan. That Fred website is very valuable. You will need those graphs for Milestone 1. Use it. Use it because it's the easiest way to get the graphs. And as I said, you download to PowerPoint, it puts it straight into your PowerPoint. All you have to do is select it, copy it, and you can paste it in the PowerPoint you're working on. Very, very easy to do. And using the percentage tool will save you from having to calculate the growth rates yourself, which is also very helpful. Yes, you can create a free account. Fred also has some videos that you can watch that teach you how to use their resources besides the graphs. They have a lot of resources that can be very helpful. But I'll see you all at Milestone 2. Make sure to attend in 2 weeks during Module 4. We will go through our fiscal policies. That's an exciting part. You will start having a better grasp of the macroeconomics aspect of this class and hands-on how it all works. Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.